Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. So, Arrow's Flight. This is, again, me taking the ebook cover because I am actually recording this video and the previous video and the next video all in one go because, why not? So, the first book in this trilogy is Talia going through the Collegium. We've had a lot of the Collegium sort of by implication over the course of this series because you have the Collegium as it is described in the Collegium Chronicles. The thing about the Collegium Chronicles, though, is those are ostensibly the period in time when the heralds were establishing their own Collegium, were establishing their own herald school, in effect. Because the thing is that if it hasn't been clear from my rambling, which it probably hasn't been, the Collegium, before that, in the time of Vaniel, was not something that you had heralds really participating in, that a herald was assigned to a particular mentor, and that mentor was supposed to teach them the stuff that you needed to know how to be a herald, and there was an arms master who taught you how to fight. The problem that had occurred in the Collegium Chronicles was, one, they were having too many trainee heralds arriving, and you couldn't have one person teaching a whole bunch of people everything they needed to know because you just couldn't afford them that attention. But also you were starting to have a bunch of people who were coming in from the sticks who were completely illiterate and would need somebody to teach them how to read and how to do basic math and all that kind of stuff that you don't learn if you're a goat herder out in the mountains. And so the Collegium got established, but it was going through a lot of growing pains in the Collegium Chronicles. And then you get to you read about it a lot in the story of Lavan Firestorm, precisely because Lavan dies so very young that you have this book that is mostly about him being in school, with this chunk at the end which is the tragedy of his going to war and his companion / life bond's death followed by his own. It's a very, very tragic story. And so this book, though, the first book, rather, Arrows of the Queen, is the book that tells you, again, you're establishing things, but it also goes through the Collegium. It goes through Talia's experiences at the Collegium, at a Collegium that has now been established for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so there's nothing there that's a new concept in terms of the nation of Valdemar. This book is basically about Talia's year in apprenticeship, her year out in the field as an intern. Because after you have completed your training at the Collegium, you've completed all of your theoretical learning, you've learned how to dead reckon by the stars, you've learned what all of the roots in the kingdom are, you've learned all of those technical things that you can learn from a book or from a teacher. Then they send the heralds out into the world to learn how to do by watching, because you don't actually learn how to negotiate a peace agreement between two warring factions in a small town who have been trying to kill each other over a border between two people's farms or whatever. You don't learn how to do that from a book. It's the kind of thing that you have to actually go out and do in practice in the field. So Talia, even though she is the Queen's Own, even though she is one of the most important heralds in the entire collective of heralds, she still has to go out there and she still has to go through this apprenticeship period where she starts by watching the person who is got charge of her make these decisions and talk them over, and then make decisions under his supervision, and then finally be the one sort of handling things and being in charge while he stays behind to back her up. That's the process, and it happens over the course of a year. The thing about the first book is you watch as Talia grows, and she learns things, and she grows into her skills and into who she is and into her role as the Queen's Own. But when she steps out with Harold Chris, who, among other things, by the end of the book, they have become friends with benefits, really. And also Chris has more or less determined that he believes that Talia is life bonded, that is soulmates with his best friend Dirk, who has a massive background subplot about a woman who was genuinely horrible to him and other stuff. But anyways, when they set out, Talia then has to go through a process because she appeared to have grown into her role and into her powers and everything else. And then while she's gone, while she is out of the court, while she is away from everything, all of a sudden her because she doesn't have telepathic powers. She is an empath. You know, like what's her name? Deanna Troi from Star Trek Next Generation. That is, Talia can read emotions, but she can't read thoughts. She can't hear words in her brain. She can only feel other people's feelings and project feelings towards other people, although she can project with sufficient strength to make a person relive an experience. This comes into play later when, among other things, she uses it to punish a person, basically using it to say, you will relive all those times you raped that girl until such time as you realize that doing that to her was wrong. If you ever realize that doing that to her was wrong, you will stop reliving it. Good luck. But anyways, the problem is that her control over her empathic abilities, her ability to keep herself from hearing everybody's emotions all the time, her control over her projection, all of that starts to fail. And part of that is because Chris's uncle basically told him a bunch of rumors which were very clearly designed to make Chris suspicious of Talia and Talia's intentions. And between Chris telling her those and the fact that she could feel his doubt, it sent her into a kind of internal spiral that ripped all of her confidence, which was still shaky, because, abused child, always going to have some confidence issues because it's kind of a thing that it takes a long time to work through, goodness knows. It kind of throws her into a mental tailspin and everything sort of gets ripped out from under her. But it also turns out that when she was learning how to control her empathic abilities, they didn't teach her things. That there was a whole foundation of it that nobody taught her. What's really fascinating about this, though, is my personal confusion, because this is one of those things where the only excuse that is come up with that is suggested that holds any water at all was that it was assumed she had figured it out on her own, and so they never taught her. But this concept of grounding and centering, where the idea is that you sort of... Centering is described in this as a process of knowing precisely who you are and placing yourself squarely in the midst of your own mental being, of your own mental self, in such a way that you know exactly who you are, psychologically, mentally, emotionally, however you want to describe it, right down to the very core of you, and knowing that 100% then allows you to be able to identify whenever something is coming in from the outside. And grounding is effectively a sort of a magical tethering yourself to the earth. Again, a matter of saying, this is who I am and I will not be moved. Here I'll stand and here I'll stay. Yes, let the storm rage on. The cold never bothered me anyway, we know. Or rather, you know, and you wish I hadn't brought it up. But here's the thing. Nobody had ever actually done that with Talia. And the thing about Talia as an empath is you are exceedingly sensitive to feelings. And the thing about feelings is feelings are always very insidious, because if you are in a situation that could theoretically cause you to feel that way, if you start feeling someone else's, I don't know, fear, it's going to be very hard to distinguish that from your own fear if you are in a situation where you think you probably should be afraid or might be afraid. And so, it's one of those things that Talia was so very mature and so very centered as a person that the only assumption you can make is that when they were teaching her this, nobody ever thought to teach her that. Which is problematic. My other guess, of course, is that somebody taught her how to shield, and the next person to talk to her said, oh, she's been taught how to shield, which means she must have first been taught how to ground and center, and the person who taught her how to shield thought that the next person would teach her how to ground and center, and it was just one of those, I thought you did it, well, I thought you did it situations. But basically it boils down to, they didn't teach her fundamentals that she should have had, and there is this harrowing section in the middle where Talia basically has thrown herself into such a tailspin that she genuinely becomes suicidal and flings all of that emotion in Chris's face when he tries to confront her about it, and he is forced to basically on the fly teach her all of those basics she wasn't taught, and then they both have to make up empathy training, because in point of fact, there is nobody who can teach her. While there are healers who are empaths, Talia's not a healer, and what healers do is very different from what a herald does, and so there are things that they don't need to know, things they don't need to learn, and ethical questions, because there's a lot in this about the ethics of empathy. There are ethical questions that they never have to ask themselves, because their job is to, I unshield to sense what my patient is feeling so that I have a better bead on how I'm supposed to fix them, and then I shield again because it's none of my business what anyone else is thinking and I don't want to know. Whereas Talia is going to be in political situations where frankly she should be reading people, and maybe even possibly using it to nudge them into a more acquiescent frame of mind, but it all depends on what sort of, situation you're in, and it's a very, very gray area. And it's the kind of gray area that nobody else is having to deal with, and so this particular book, you are very much exploring, along with Talia, the question of what are the ethical implications of empathy, particularly an empathy of the sort and strength that Talia demonstrates. If you compare her to Deanna Troy's empathy is very much a receptive thing. She doesn't have a projective empathy. She doesn't have the ability to effectively warp somebody else's mind with her empathy, should she so desire, whereas Talia does. That's the thing about powerful projective powers as opposed to mere reception, is that you receive the emotions, yes, you can react to them, but your manipulation is going to be very, very limited. In Talia's case, she can manipulate directly at the affecting someone else's emotional state level. She can make somebody feel the way she wants them to feel. And it makes ethics a little bit more complicated, especially when you are left with ethical questions of, if I use this to calm somebody down in the midst of an argument so they can think more rationally, is it a good or a bad use? At what point should I use it? At what point shouldn't? Because goodness knows she has it. And something like that is not something that should be ignored. It is something that needs to be used. In any event, so that's basically this book. It's a lot of ethics, panic, and some suicidality, and also a discovery of, the joys of sex. There's a certain amount of that, although it's not very explicit at all. So that's all about this book, and I'll see you all next week.